group that's dedicated to exploring the solutions to the global climate crisis using high impact actions to create a healthy world. And our community focus is on four main areas: water stewardship, waste management, reforestation, and political advocacy. And we also look at partnerships with other environmental groups. And we also are always open to new members, and you could contact us through our email, Facebook, or there's links on our YouTube channel. I will take a minute here to do the territory acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land in which we are gathered is part of the traditional Chippewa, Potawatomi, and Odawa and Delaware nations, and it is a sacred responsibility of all people on this land to ensure that the environment remains protected. A couple housekeeping things. Please make sure your microphone are muted during the talk. We will take questions after the presentation. Ed will tackle some of those. So please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions that you have during Ed's talk. And please note that this session is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel. So I'd just like to take a minute and introduce Ed. And Ed, of course, is talking about the hydrogen economy and the Sarnia-Lambton opportunity. So Ed's a professional chemical engineer and holds a Master's of Science degree in Environment and Management from the Royal Roads University. He has over 35 years of leadership experience in the energy sector with Shell Oil, Ontario Hydro, Atomic Energy of Canada, and in 2009, he retired from Shell to form his own consulting company to pursue his passion for sustainable energy. Ed is currently Managing Director of the Innovation and Sustainable Development with the Carbovate Development Corporation, and volunteers his time as an associate with the nonprofit corporation, the Bowman Center for Sustainable Energy. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Ed Brost.
Thank you very much, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you tonight. The world is undergoing an energy revolution. Things and equipment and the way we generate, even sometimes how we use energy, is moving so fast it's really hard to keep pace. And one of the areas that's evolving is around hydrogen. Now, we've been hearing about hydrogen economies for decades. It seems like it's always 10 years away, but something's different. The world is seems to have the resolve to actually decarbonize our economy. And hydrogen could play a big role in that, especially in areas of the economy that are difficult to decarbonize. For example, how do you send a container ship across the ocean if you don't burn diesel fuel? And so there might be a role for hydrogen there. So tonight, we're going to talk about hydrogen. What is it? How do we make and use hydrogen? Hydrogen is linked to energy and decarbonization. A big one, how do we store hydrogen? And if you pull all those tentacles together, they take you somewhere. They take you to Sarnia. That's where they take you. So let's start by talking about, we're going to enter an arena here, a topic that is so engaging, nail-biting, exciting. You can't stop listening. It's chemistry. We're going to have a chemistry lesson. So hydrogen is the lightest element in the periodic table. You never get it as elemental hydrogen. It's always bound to something, including itself, to form H2 or hydrogen. And that when we use the word hydrogen, that's really what we're referring to. We're referring to molecular hydrogen gas. Now, the hydrogen has it's a colorless, odorless, non-toxic gas. It carries a tremendous energy punch. It contains more energy per kilogram on a mass basis than any other compound that we have outside of nuclear fuels. When it burns with a colorless, very hot flame, and under the right conditions, it'll explode, which means it can be used as a fuel for internal combustion engines. Today, hydrogen is used, it's manufactured in large volumes around the world. And fun fact, Canada is one of the largest hydrogen producers in the world, not geographically, but by volume. But it's used for its chemical properties mainly, not so much its energy properties. Hydrogen is used down the river to make ammonia. reacting to make hydrogen, starting with steam. We'll talk about that in a sec. With natural gas, and reactor with nitrogen to produce ammonia. All of the refineries use hydrogen to improve the properties of the fuels that we use. But its use for its energy content that's not very well established so far. Now, as I said, hydrogen is a gas. There are no mines. You can't go mining for hydrogen. There are no hydrogen gas wells. The only way to get hydrogen is to take it from another molecule, like water, H2O, or methane, natural gas, 1 carbon, 4 hydrogens. And so you can take the hydrogen from methane or other hydrocarbons. You can make hydrogen from gasoline. The thing is, these bonds are very, very strong. It takes gobs of energy to get the hydrogen off those molecules. And so an energy input is required to get hydrogen. And now sometimes you'll hear on the media, people will be talking about hydrogen. They'll talk about it as hydrogen being a source of energy. Hydrogen is not a source of energy. Hydrogen is an energy carrier. You need to put energy in to get hydrogen. And according to the laws of thermodynamics, you can't ever get as much out as you put in. So energy is a big input. So now that we know what hydrogen is, we are all chemists with a specialty in hydrogen. How do you make it? Well, like I said, you got to start with something that contains hydrogen. And the most common, almost ubiquitous way to make hydrogen around the world today is to start with natural gas. And so if you inject, if you inject a pile of energy into methane, which is mostly, natural gas is mainly methane, and you put in water, it takes about, well, depending on efficiencies, but between 15 and 20 tons of water to make 1 ton of hydrogen in a steam methane reformer, or also known as an SMR. And so when you put in the energy, you put in the natural gas, and you put in the water, and you put it in a big magic back box, out comes 2 products. Well, 2 major products, hydrogen and CO2, because and about 10 tons of CO2 is produced for every ton of hydrogen produced in a steam methane reformer. And for the most part is vented to the atmosphere. There are a couple of examples. The technology exists. The issue is economics, as is often, almost always the case. You can't capture it. It's actually being done by a plant in Alberta, operated by Shell. It's called the Quest Project, and they recover about 50% of the CO2 produced at that plant and sequester it. Another way to make hydrogen is through electrolysis. And since we're all chemists, and we probably remember doing this in high school, you put a couple of electrodes in water and you get bubbles. And so if you add electricity, again, gobs of electricity into water, you get 2 products. Hydrogen, our target, but you also get oxygen. And that's important because oxygen is a very valuable material. There are other ways to make hydrogen, and there's at least 2 research projects going on in Alberta that I'm aware of that strip the hydrogen off of methane without creating the CO2. You get pure carbon. That's in the development phase. We won't go there, but you can imagine the proponents of that hydrogen would like it to be considered green hydrogen. But you just caught me in a conflict here. Didn't I just say it's colorless? And now I'm saying it's green? Well, having it, I forgot, that's why I have slides. A fun fact, if you had 2 containers, 1 liter each, on the one hand, you had a liter of gasoline, and on the other, you had a liter of hydrogen. Which one contains more hydrogen? Intuitively, you would say the hydrogen container, but that's actually not true. A liter of gasoline contains more hydrogen than a liter of liquid hydrogen. So anyways, I just thought that was interesting. And so the color of hydrogen, so we can't have everything as simple as, colorless gas burns colorless flame. We need to make it complicated, otherwise it's just not fair. So we've come up with a color scheme, or not me, the world. And so you can use the energy content of coal, add a bunch of water to it, and you can make hydrogen. And because it's so carbon intense, that method of making hydrogen is called black hydrogen. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as brown hydrogen. But if you go to all the trouble and expense to capture the CO2 that's liberated when you produce hydrogen in this manner, you get blue hydrogen. And you hear a lot about this, especially in Alberta, because Alberta wants to get into the hydrogen world in a really big way by using natural gas to make hydrogen and then capture the carbon. So natural gas, if you don't capture the carbon, is referred to as gray hydrogen. You can give it a promotion though by recovering or capturing the carbon, and you can make blue hydrogen. Then we have the green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is made when you make hydrogen with an energy input that doesn't have carbon emissions associated with it, as in renewably generated electricity. If you generate electricity with coal, then it's not green hydrogen anymore. And the key thing to remember here is once you have the hydrogen, and once it's on spec, it's pure hydrogen, it meets whatever the customer's requirements are, there will be no emissions of carbon associated with it. So the product itself, whether it be blue hydrogen or green hydrogen, has no emissions associated with it. But if you use emitting energy, then it's going to be either black or gray hydrogen. And you can see what's happening here. Coal, natural gas, cheapest way to make hydrogen. If you add carbon capture to it, it's still cheaper today than, although I saw a paper today that I haven't read yet that contradicts that statement. But in any case, green hydrogen is quite a bit more expensive to produce than is, say, natural gas. The most common is this by SMR, and it's why we don't use green hydrogen today. So now that we've made the hydrogen, what are we going to do with it? Or sorry, how are we using it today? Well, I just mentioned a few minutes ago, existing industries use hydrogen made from SMRs. The issue is price. So even if we could produce hydrogen for other markets, it costs too much. If somebody wanted to, I don't know, fuel a ship with hydrogen today, and all of the only interest or concern was the price of the hydrogen, then they're going to buy hydrogen from a SMR. They're not going to buy electrolytic hydrogen because it's about 5 times as expensive today. And so price is a barrier to decarbonization using hydrogen. There are to be established markets if we can get to somewhere that resembles a hydrogen economy that are difficult to decarbonize today. Now, I show transportation fuel there. It's pretty much a given. I don't know if the war is over yet, but batteries have won for light duty vehicles. Electric cars are now commonplace. Electric pickup trucks, by this time next year, there's going to be 6 of them on the market from a variety of competitors. And so the light duty vehicle market is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about heavy duty markets, for example, trucking loads of steel from Hamilton to Alberta or BC. It's pretty hard to imagine that trucks will be battery powered. They could be. That competition, that is a active area of competition today, but there are also a lot of people betting heavily on hydrogen fuel as for heavy duty long distance transport. Another example is there are a number of ferries around the world, like boats, that are operating on batteries. Think of the Chichimon. There are ferries in Scandinavian countries that are the size and range of the Chichimon operating on batteries. But it's hard to imagine a container ship traveling from China to Vancouver on batteries. And hydrogen is seen as a strong candidate for that kind of future market. There are chemical industries. If we could get the prices down, if hydrogen was half the price of SMR hydrogen, the local refineries would all shut down their SMRs and buy it from a green hydrogen supplier. Another opportunity is bandied about, but we have to be careful with it, and that is using hydrogen to generate electricity. That is why Goofy is on the screen. It's because if you already have the clean electricity, why would you make the hydrogen to make electricity? That would be goofy. But what if we had a better idea? What if we all know that electricity is cheaper at night. It's cheaper to produce at night than it is in the daytime because of the demand. And so if we were to generate the electricity at night and then, generate the hydrogen at night and then produce electricity from that hydrogen to supply power in the daytime, we might be able to make some money to take advantage of the diurnal price changes. There's also another feature. I'm not going to get into it here, but there is low quality power and there's high quality power. And the power we would generate with hydrogen would be supreme power quality. And so we probably, speculating, we can likely get a premium for the quality because we're putting high quality power on the grid. And other feature that has economic value is response time. When everybody comes home at 5:30 or whatever and plugs in their electric car, you need to have a new generation brought on. You need to have it brought on quickly. And natural gas is now something called single cycle natural gas plants do that because they can respond faster. They're not as efficient. They're CO2 intense, more CO2 intense than more efficient units. And so we think we could get a premium for the response time feature characteristic of the hydrogen. But if we're going to generate power at night, I keep saying that if we're going to produce hydrogen at night and then generate power in the daytime, we need storage. You can't, generating in real time is a difficult thing to do and would make no sense to do it in real time. So if we need storage, then we've got to figure out how to store this stuff. Hydrogen is a gas under standard conditions. It's kind of a difficult material because it is so light. And so we have to come up with storage techniques, and that technology, of course, is already around. They require specialized vessels. They operate at very high pressure. They use exotic materials to store hydrogen. And so I'll say a ship or a truck that's fueled on hydrogen would have a specialized high pressure hydrogen fuel tank. You could use liquid hydrogen, like cool it down to minus, I think it's 253 degrees C. You need specialized, very expensive equipment to get the stuff down to that temperature. Of course, that consumes some of the energy that you were going to sell. And that's, so it's just, it doesn't seem to be practical to have trucks with liquid hydrogen, but we'll see where the world unfolds. The technology, like I said, is unfolding very quickly. But can you imagine if we're storing bulk hydrogen to produce hundreds of megawatt hours for 8 hours a day? You'd have tank farms. You drive by the refineries and you see acres, tens of acres of tank. Can you imagine tens of acres of hydrogen storage vessels? It seems impractical to me, but there is another way. Geologic storage. Below us, below Sarnia-Lambton, several hundred meters is a very thick vein of salt. It's deep, so it's well away from the surface. And you know what you don't have if you have salt? If you have salt, you don't have water. That is so the environment down there is very, very dry. And so that is why for about 100 years now, people have been washing out, it's called solution mining, washing out caverns in this salt vein and storing a variety of materials in there, like natural gas, like LPG, liquefied petroleum gases like propane and butane, as well as gasoline and even crude oil, not local. I don't think anybody's storing crude oil locally in salt caverns, but others do. It looks sort of like this. It's the blue is the salt vein, and then the overburden is above. And so you drill a hole down deep and you inject fresh water, you wash out a cavern, and dump the salt in the ocean, and you have a salt cavern. And here's the thing. This isn't my idea. I wish I could say it was. People are already storing hydrogen in salt caverns. Not in Canada. There are a couple. There's at least one. I think there might be 2 salt caverns that are used to store hydrogen in the United States, and then there's a few in Europe, mainly in the Scandinavian countries. So this technology is proven. It's been, they've been doing it for a while. So why not here in Sarnia-Lambton? Uh-oh. I wish I could get there. So we talked about we're now experts. We're all chemists now specializing in hydrogen. We know all about how hydrogen is made. We know it can be made with electrolyzers. We know that it can be stored, and we think it can be stored in salt caverns. We know it can be used in fuel cells or combustion equipment to generate electricity, and we can do that in bulk. And so, behold, the Sarnia-Lambton hydrogen battery. And I'll go through this. This looks a little complicated, but it's actually simple. So we start with a windmill over here on the left, and the wind is blowing. It's generating power at night when nobody needs it. And the nuclear plants are dumping energy to the lake because it's too expensive to turn them down. So we have this cheap, no carbon, not low, but no carbon electricity going into the grid and going in to plug in to charge your electric car at night. But we still have too much. So the rest of it, we could take some of that load and put it into an electrolyzer. The electrolyzer, like the thing you did in high school, produces two products. It produces oxygen. I don't know if I mentioned, this stuff is worth about between $1,000 and $5,000 a ton, and we're going to make tons of it. The other product, of course, is our hydrogen. It's at a low pressure. It has to go through a compressor. I'm not showing. There's a motor on here that compresses the hydrogen so that it can be forced into the well at very high pressure. And it's stored. And then the sun comes up and everybody goes to work, and the factories, the fab shops all start up, and you guys are frying eggs and bacon on your electric stove. We need some electricity. So we then run this compressor backwards because the motor can become a generator. So depressuring the hydrogen can generate electricity. I'm not showing that here. And the low pressure hydrogen then can go to a fuel cell. And the fuel cell, I don't know if I mentioned, it takes about 10 tons of water, 9 tons of water to make a ton of hydrogen with an electrolyzer. But if we use the hydrogen this way with a fuel cell rather than selling it to put on a ship or something, when you oxidize, or when you put the hydrogen through the fuel cell, it has a product, and that product is pure water. And so once the plant is started up, it really doesn't need any water anymore because it can run on the same water. Just goes around in circles, same water, and the electricity then goes to the grid to run the pizza shop in the daytime. So that is our big idea. And as far as we know, nobody in the world has actually done this. All of these components, though, are proven. Windmills are obviously proven. Electrolyzers are proven technology. There's an existing huge market for oxygen, hospitals or in some chemical industries. Salt caverns are proven. So are fuel cells, actually big manufacturer in Canada, Ballard Fuel Cells. So that's that. So now that we have this battery, if we had this thing in place, we could then go back to the future and rethink the market. So as I mentioned, there are difficult to decarbonize markets, like, for example, transportation and certain chemical industries. Decarbonizing, say, a refinery wouldn't be that big a deal. Converting the furnaces to run on hydrogen, that would be expensive. I don't see that ever happening, really. But when I talk about industries, I'm really thinking of something like steel. To make steel, we use the chemical properties and the energy that's in coal to turn iron ore, which is iron oxide, into elemental iron. And the oxygen that was on the iron molecule attaches itself to the carbon to form, guess what? CO2. It's very intensive energy, CO2 intensive industry, and it's difficult to decarbonize that. But you could do that. You could do the same thing. It's called chemically reducing the iron ore to steel, and the product would be hydrogen plus oxygen or water. So that is a potential, a huge potential, that type of industry for hydrogen in the future, and a pathway to decarbonize that industry. I mentioned here, don't forget, if we're thinking of economics, don't forget the value of the oxygen. So one thing that I mentioned earlier is the issue, the roadblock here for decades has been the price. Well, what has surprised the world, and is part of this revolution that I talked about at the beginning, is the price of solar and wind. Today, solar generated electricity and wind generated electricity, at least in some parts of the world, are actually cheaper than it costs to fuel coal plants, which is one of the reasons why coal plants are shutting down, because it's cheaper to shut down the plant and build a put in wind power with batteries than it is to just operate the coal plant. If you need new demand, it's cheaper to build wind and solar than it is. So McKinsey and Bloomberg and Wood Mackenzie and that crowd are all forecasting that because of the reductions in renewable energy, by 2030, the price of hydrogen generated through electrolysis will be at parity or lower than by natural gas by about 2030. So I have a question for you. If we were going to have an established hydrogen generation production industry in Canada so that it's mature and can compete in the world stage by 2030, when do you suppose we should start? I'm going to say we should have started last year. But our government it seems to be, and we're going to have a budget next week. We'll see if there's going to be money available for this type of project. Because countries around the world, like about almost 100 countries around the world, or I should say jurisdictions around the world, have already have hydrogen strategies and plans in place, and some countries are actually executing them. In some jurisdictions, one of them is in Canada, is already executing it. So Ontario last fall issued a discussion paper. The discussion period ended, I think it was January 31st. In any case, the Bowman Center commented on it, as did the Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership, SLEP, commented on it. And so Ontario, I presume, their budget came out today, but I didn't get to see what was in it. But in any case, Ontario is planning to put together a hydrogen strategy. Hopefully it'll be soon. Alberta already has their hydrogen strategy. It's called Natural Gas Vision, but it's really about producing huge volumes of blue hydrogen for export markets, starting with natural gas. Quebec has already got their program underway. In fact, they have an 88 megawatt electrolyzer under construction now, ready to start up in 2023. Last December, the federal government issued the national, through Natural Resources Canada, its hydrogen strategy. It's about a 140-page document. It's very well written, very easy to read. If this kind of thing interests you, the link is nrcan. You just go to the NRCan website, you'll be able to find it. And in there, they talk about all kinds of opportunities for pretty well every jurisdiction of Canada to participate in a future hydrogen. The hydrogen economy is not really a right word. There'll be the hydrogen sector in the energy economy someday, we hope. And so this hydrogen strategy, it's well laid out. It doesn't come up with money, because you wouldn't see that so much in a strategy document, but it makes one believe that there will be money becoming available for credible hydrogen projects. So that document, the federal strategy, it talks about regional hubs and regional hydrogen development hubs, but it doesn't really say what that is. And so I decided to make a list. Well, what would be the characteristics or features of a community or region that would make it amenable to being one of these hubs, maybe even the first one? And so first thing you need is you'd have a receptive community. If the community doesn't want this there, then it's going to be hard to get regulatory approvals. You would need to have Aboriginal community or First Nations support for this kind of a thing. You need to have access to water. This is a fairly water-intensive business. You need access to a skilled labor market. You would need access to potential heavy industrial customers for the hydrogen that you're going to produce. You would like to have, you'd like to have access to underutilized green and low carbon electricity. You would like to have experience with grid scale electricity production, people who know how to make thousands of megawatt hours. To have people with that kind of skill set would be great, especially it's a specialty, high voltage and high power equipment that goes with that. Having local experience with the design, construction, and operation of salt caverns. Now that would be amazing to have that, because there aren't very many regions in Canada that have salt caverns. You would want to have experience in designing and building and operating hydrogen facilities. a region that has already in-house how to build and operate and safely handle hydrogen would be a really strong advantage point. Experience in handling hydrogen. Well, if you already know how to make it, you should know how to handle it safely. There's going to be a whole bunch of new skill sets required here. It'd be good to have a college or university that's capable of designing, developing, and delivering the training for a new and expanded hydrogen economy. Key to any business is having access to markets. If you build your plant in the middle of nowhere, then you got to ship it. It gets more expensive. But if you already have access to, docks, tunnels and cross into another country, bridges, that would be a good thing to have. Look at this. I'm going from memory instead of looking at the slides. So we already talked about markets. Any endeavor like this will require environmental social impact study. And it would be good to have consultants in your community who actually know how to conduct impact assessments and know the strengths and weaknesses from an environmental perspective of that community. There may be others that you could add to the list, but this was what I came up with. And there's one that's not quite here, and it's key, I think. And that has the geology for bulk storage. So we have a list. I haven't counted them. There's probably a dozen there, including bulk storage. So I have a question for the audience. Does anyone recognize a region in Canada with these prerequisites or characteristics? Any community that has a bunch of these would be a strong candidate. Any community that has all of these prerequisites seems to me would be slam dunk. It would be up to them to lose it because they have it all. Anybody have any ideas? Let me give you a hint. Sarnia, we have everything on that list in spades. And it seems to me that Canada is lucky to have a region like this if we're serious about having a large hydrogen component capable of exporting hydrogen to the world in this country, and it's right here in our own community. So what's happening? What are we doing about this? Last summer, we put together a proposal to do an engineering study and submitted that to Queen's University, their capstone program. This project is being funded by the Bowman Center for Sustainable Energy. It kicked off last September. Some of you probably know Peter Smith. Peter's partner in crime with me on this. So Peter and I participate in bi-weekly meetings with the students. They had a interim report in January. The project is coming on very well, and it will be completed in about a month. We hope to use that study as a launching pad. There you go, a launching pad to try to gain interest in investors and political and community support for this program. In addition to that, we met with SLEP, Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership, last week, myself and a few others from the Bowman Center. And SLEP is very cognizant of this initiative, the notion that Canada would like to get involved in hydrogen. And so they as well commented on, wrote a paper or submission to the Ontario discussion paper. And they are now forming I forgot what they call it, but anyway, it's going to be a hydrogen committee. I'll be representing the Bowman Center on that committee. And so that's underway. Both Bob Bailey and Marilyn Gladue both are well aware of the notion that we want to develop hydrogen in Canada. And we think are supportive of this idea. We haven't personally talked to either one of them about it. Well, one of the Bowman Center, Marshall Kern, has talked to Marilyn about it. So that's what's happening so far in Sarnia-Lambton to try to pursue this. So in summary, we've talked about hydrogen. We're all experts now on what hydrogen is. We talked about how we make hydrogen today and how we use hydrogen today. We talked about how energy might play a role in decarbonizing not only Canada's, but the global economy. And we talked about how we get hydrogen, how we make it, how to store it, and how Sarnia-Lambton might be an enabler. Like if we could kick this thing off in Sarnia to demonstrate that we could safely produce and store hydrogen in bulk and make electricity wouldn't be the most economically lucrative product. If we can start and show the world that you can use this to fuel ships. So just off the cuff, what if we we get some funding and we convert the Duke d'Orleans to run on hydrogen, not because it makes economic sense, but to show that it can be done. Maybe one of Purdy's boats, maybe a Coast Guard boat. Some of the plants have their own railroad shunt engines. Maybe we can get money to. The idea is that if we have the hydrogen, then we can build the market by demonstrating it here in Sarnia and lead the way for the country. If you think that this is a good idea and you would like to help, get in touch with Bob and with Marilyn and talk it up around the community. And if you have brilliant ideas and you want to bounce them off somebody, call Paul Bodette's on the call here. We'll call Paul. No, call the Bowman Center or get in touch with us. We'd be glad to work on your idea around this topic. So with that, that's it. If you have any questions, I'd be delighted to hear them.
Thanks, Ed. That was great. Very thought-provocative. And we do have some questions, so I'll just start at the top here and let them read them out. And it says, how much energy is required to make hydrogen from methane compared to that required to make it from water or electrolysis?
I haven't actually looked that up, but in a steam methane reformer, you're breaking you're breaking the bonds of two different molecules. One of them is the methane. So you're going to separate. What happens is you create syngas. So you burn the methane in the air it's called substoichiometric. You don't have enough to go all the way to CO2. So you produce CO, carbon monoxide, and you produce hydrogen. That takes energy. You actually generate steam with it. Then you go to the next part of the plant where you inject a lot of steam, and there you're breaking molecules again. This time you're breaking the water molecules. The oxygen that's on the water joins up with the carbon monoxide to form CO2 and hydrogen. Now, in the case of electrolysis, you're only breaking up one molecule, and that's the water molecule. So I don't know the answer to your question. I've never really looked at it, but I'm going to speculate that the energy input, joule is the unit of energy, or BTUs, the amount of joules or megajoules required to produce hydrogen from a SMR, I'm guessing is going to be quite a bit higher than the amount of energy required from electrolysis. But that's something I will check into.
Okay,
good question. Thanks.
That was from your buddy, Peter.
Peter Smith? Way to go, Peter. Thanks for putting me on the spot.
Next question is green hydrogen for steel and cement production?
Yes. Oh, is that a question or?
That was the question. That's all they have there.
Okay, let's treat those separately. Okay. Steel production, I think, is more straightforward than from cement. Coal or petroleum coke is used, as I mentioned earlier in the talk, to convert iron ore, which is like Fe2O3 or something. Rod will know. Anyway, it's iron oxide. And what you need to do if you want to make steel or iron is you've got to get that oxygen molecule off of the iron molecule. You've got to break that up, and that's a very stable molecule. Look at your old car; it's rusty, and it's because that's a stable form. It's more stable than not same. It's a lower energy level than the steel is. So but carbon comes with a huge energy content, so it generates a lot of heat when it's oxidized, and the carbon really, really, really wants that oxygen molecule bad, so bad that it'll steal it right off of the iron molecule, and so what you're really doing is chemically reducing the iron oxide to elemental iron. Well, hydrogen is a reducing agent, very potent. And so you can use hydrogen. It's just it costs more. You can use hydrogen to make steel, and the byproduct, instead of CO2, so when the carbon molecule in the coal steals the oxygen molecule off the iron, it becomes CO2 and it gets released to the atmosphere. But if you make hydrogen, you make steel using hydrogen, you get water, steam. Now, if you want to so that's one. I hope that answers your question. The next one, you said cement. Cement is a really thorny problem because there's two kinds of CO2 emission associated with. One's a chemical emission, emission from combustion because they need to heat it up. And that could be heated up, that heat could be provided by hydrogen as a fuel or even electricity. Rather, you don't necessarily need to go through the hydrogen conversion. But the other part, so limestone is calcium carbonate, and that is, and so what you're doing when you heat it up is it becomes unstable, and the CO2 is driven off of the calcium carbonate to form calcium oxide, which is the cement. You can't use hydrogen for that. That's just a thermal process. You're literally breaking down the limestone molecule. So if you want to decarbonize that, as far as I know, the only way to do that is with carbon capture, but I'm not an expert on that either.
Okay. Next question is, where does the salt go if you wash out a salt vein? Yeah, so you use fresh water that dissolves the salt, creates a hole, the cavern. You pump that brine, it's saturated salt water now, saturated with salt, and you load it on a ship. It's clean salt water, and you take it out to the ocean and you dump it. Or you can, it is clean salt. Like there are companies that will take the brine. You can use, there's all kinds of purposes, but because we're dealing with fairly large volume, at least one outlet for the brine is ocean dumping. Now, the other part to keep in mind is there are two kinds of salt caverns. There's a dry cavern, which is by you just pressurize the material, you use it like an underground tank. But the most common salt cavern has a brine pond, and that's so some of the brine you're going to wash out, you're going to keep because you need it to make the thing work. So what happens is the cavern, after you wash it out, it's full of brine, and that's what this compressor is for that I showed in my cartoon. You have a stringer with two tubes in it, if you like, and you force hydrogen down one stringer which goes to the bottom of the cavern, and it starts bubbling, and the brine has to go somewhere. And the pressure of the hydrogen forces the brine up this 600 meter or whatever it is stringer, and it has to go somewhere. It goes into the brine pond. And so when you want to get the hydrogen, so now what you have is a pond full of brine and a cavern full of high pressure hydrogen. So now when you want the hydrogen, you want to do something with it, all you do is open the valve and drain the brine because it's heavy. The weight of the brine, 600 liters of brine is very high pressure, forces the hydrogen out of the well. So there's two answers to your question. What do you do with the brine? First of all, the excess brine, you'll have to dispose of, either sell it for its salt content, but you also have an inventory of brine as an operating fluid. Great. It says, if you have a car with a solar panel roof, is it economic to make hydrogen while not driving?
I'm going to say no. Here's the thing. If you were at the equator and it was around noon, the amount of energy you can generate, the amount of energy hitting the panel is about 100 watts per square meter. Solar panels today are between 20 and 30%, so you get 20 or 30 watts. An electric car has a 60 or 70,000 watt hour battery. So the idea that you're going to use solar panels to drive your car is not really very practical. If you could charge it for a little while, and you might get 10 or 15 kilometers of range out of the panel at night if you weren't using the car in the daytime. And the same thing happens to if you're going to produce electricity. 30, say net 30 watts out of a 1 square meter panel, if that's the size of the car roof, you could use it to generate electricity, but I don't think it would be enough hydrogen to do anything meaningful with. Like, I don't think it would be enough to run your barbecue to cook dinner.
It says, are oil companies interested in this as a transition from their toxic industry, or are they Luddites? Well,
first of all, the answer is yeah. Hydrogen, I know that Shell has a whole division called Shell Hydrogen. Now, they're probably more interested in blue hydrogen than electrolytic hydrogen, but in any case, yes, I would say, as a general statement, the industry knows that they have to decarbonize. Companies like Shell and BP have made very aggressive claims on how they're going to decarbonizing not only their plants, but also offset the emissions associated with customers who use their fuels. So that's Shell and BP have both made this called Scope 3 emissions, and both companies, I think, have committed to do that by 2050. So the oil companies they're private sector companies, and they owe their allegiance to their shareholders. They cannot go and buy green hydrogen and pay a lot of money for it if they can buy gray hydrogen at 1/5 the cost. If we could get the cost down, and that's what Bloomberg and that gang, well, not just Bloomberg, but others are saying, is that by 2030, the prices will come down. And so at that time, when it becomes more, and here's another thing. Peter did some excellent work for our project, Peter Smith, looking at what would be the impact of, say, $170 carbon tax, which is currently on the books by 2030. And I can't remember exactly, but it seems to me that Peter's spreadsheet, I think, showed that with $170 carbon tax, we would be at parity with natural gas SMR hydrogen by around 2028 or so. So I think getting back to the question is, it all comes down to economics. If it can be made economic, I think the refineries would go for it. I don't know why they wouldn't.
Okay. Next question, is it safe to store large amounts of hydrogen?
Well, yes. Let me ask the audience a question, and you think about this for a second. Would you strap yourself, like literally strap yourself to a container containing enough fuel energy to drive 2.5 tons of steel to Toronto and back? Well, if you say you wouldn't, be surprised, because that is a car. There's enough energy packed in the fuel tank of your car to propel tons of steel all the way to Toronto and back. The engineering to make that safe has been done. And the engineering to store natural gas will be, I think, more hazardous, like more of a technical challenge to store in bulk in salt caverns, for example, than would be hydrogen, simply because hydrogen is so light. If you have a leak, it's gone. And so I think the answer to your question is yes. Not only am I confident that the answer is yes, it's because it's already being done. Like I mentioned earlier, salt caverns are being used in the United States and in Europe already. And so if their engineers are smart enough to do it, I think Canadian engineers can figure it out too. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, another one here, supercharged innovation, Ed, bravo. Sarnia has so much talent. What's your realistic forecast in making this a reality for our community?
Well, I live in fantasy land. So asking me for a realistic guess is not, but I'm going to say our project will be, our feasibility study, if you like, will be done in a couple of months. If the government and the politicians have the resolve with the support of the public and First Nations communities, I don't see why we couldn't have something operating within a couple of years. But I told you, I dream big.
Sure.
Let me answer it this way. If we want this to happen, a project like this, typical from concept to regulatory approval to financial sanction, a project like this, probably, I don't see why it couldn't be built in 2 to 3 years. Whether the people in our country, and it's all of us, me included, are prepared to make it happen is really the question. Others are doing it. Like I said, countries around the world are already ahead of us. To my mind, there's a level of urgency here. If we don't get this for ourselves, like for our community, it's because other communities got it ahead of us, and we are probably a better fit for it than most communities in the country. So how long will it take? I think it depends on all of us.
Great. Says, who's on the hydrogen committee at SLEP and what's their role?
I only know one person that's on it so far. That's me. Okay. No, the committee is being formed. I imagine Shauna will be on it, but I don't know that. So it's just being put together.
And they want to know specifically how can Eco Champions support this type of initiative if we wanted to make some calls or write some emails? How could it be supported?
I think we need the support of regional, provincial, and federal politicians taking the message to their leaders in Ottawa and in Queen's Park and Sarnia. So if you want to write letters or you want to write emails, I would start with the mayor, councillors, Bob Bailey, and Marilyn. And if you have access to people in Ottawa and in Queen's Park, have at her. I think that's the way. I think that's if we have a grassroots support for this thing driving really hard, then I think the politicians in Ottawa and Queen's Park are going to have a hard time saying no because we're qualified.
Yeah. Another question, are colleges looking ahead to train and prepare people for these types of new jobs?
I think my understanding is Lambton College is doing a really good job on this sort of thing. And little known fact, at least to me, is Lambton College, I think is one of the top fundraisers in the college system in the country for getting research money. So I think we're really fortunate to have Lambton College, and I think the capacity of that organization to design and build programs to meet an activity like this is already there.
Okay. Another one is, Ed, would you be willing to offer a sample support letter for us?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that could just be sent to our email address. I'm thinking people if they want to send it in, they would be looking for some suggestions and ideas that we could include in the letter to send to the politicians. Mm-hmm. It certainly wouldn't hurt.
No, that's what exactly.
Yeah. Another question, I read about Toyota has developed a ship that uses salt water to run a fuel cell. And they are capable of traveling anywhere in any ocean for as long as they want because they constantly convert the salt water into hydrogen to run the fuel cell. Have you read of this or heard of this ship?
Well, it sounds, there's got to be more to the story than that, Paul, because you can make hydrogen with salt water. Most electrolyzers really want really pure water, but you generate hydrogen. You need an energy input to the salt. Like, where is that coming from? Is that coming from a battery or is that coming from hydrocarbon fuel? Like, you need to put energy into whatever it is that's taking the hydrogen out of the salt water. Sure. And what you mentioned there I don't know what Toyota was doing on that. Like, how that works.
Because it looks like Toyota is betting on fuel cells
yes,
in terms of for their automobile division. So. But I think earlier you mentioned that you think batteries will win out. Do you have a comment there?
Yeah, sure. Right now, to buy a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle would be tough. You can. There's a Toyota Mirai. I don't know how you pronounce it. Mirai, I think. And most car companies, they don't say a lot about it, and the budgets aren't as big. But pretty much all the car companies are still working on hydrogen as a fuel supply for light duty vehicles. I don't think I said the battle was over, but it's very strongly in favor of batteries today. And where batteries seem to be headed, I just can't see hydrogen catching up, especially with the convenience that you can charge your car at home. If you have a fuel cell car that's running on hydrogen, you have to go to the hydrogen fueling station, which is a pain. It's like having to go to get gas. And so, but Toyota still is working really hard. So is BMW, working on hydrogen fuel cells, and Mercedes-Benz, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, had an announcement on their fuel cell program. We have Ballard, I think it's Energy Systems out of BC, who is a world leader in fuel cells mainly for, well, they also do stationary, but mainly for transportation. And so we'll see where it all heads. Like I said, we're in a revolution and the war's not over, but it's moving, and it's moving very, very fast.
Yeah, because infrastructure would be an issue right now for hydrogen in terms of where there aren't a lot of stations you can drive to fill up with hydrogen.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing with like Canada now has a network you can cross the country with an electric car. The stations are, well, I've lost count now how many charging stations we have here in Sarnia. There are a bunch of what are called level 2 stations, which, you know, they're just kind of like for a top up, but that's what you'd have at your home most likely, is a level 2 charge. It's a dryer outlet if it's plugged into. But then the high voltage DC chargers, and there's 4 of them at Lambton Mall Road and X Mall. That intersection is a Plaza Mall in there, and if you go in there, there's I think it's EVgo. I forget which brand. Like there's a bunch of brands now, just like there are Shell and Imperial and Suncor and whatever. There's numerous brands of high voltage DC charging companies selling a charge. It costs about $7 to charge a Tesla, and that gives you about 500 kilometers of range. And so their charging stations, that's not there for hydrogen. So, you know, that is another disadvantage. Aside from the convenience, somebody's got to pay for the infrastructure. I kind of think for heavy duty vehicles, we'll see how to, like, as we all know, Tesla has their Tesla Semi, and all of the big trucking companies are in this business because you know, one of my favorite sayings is Wayne Gretzky, go where the puck is going to be, not to where it is. And Boeing, Airbus, companies like Sky Blue, which they don't build planes, they sell airplane trips. They're spending literally hundreds of millions of dollars already for battery electric regional air transport. That is, you know, Calgary to Toronto. They're not betting that money because of the battery technology that's here today. They're spending that money and betting that the technology, that kind of battery technology, will be here in a few years. And when they do, they're going to have the planes ready to go. And so, you know, watch this space.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're almost out of time, and you've actually answered all the questions that we had. So I do want to thank you again for a great presentation. Certainly something exciting for our community, and it certainly seems to be the future for sure. So thank you very much, Ed. That was great.
Okay, thank you.